September 20th, 2024. Cottonwood Heights, Utah. A town resting quietly against the Wasatch Mountains, where nights are cool, streets are calm, and the glow of porch lights flickers across manicured lawns. It's the kind of place people move to for safety and stability. The kind of place where crime feels distant, something that happens elsewhere, to other families. But on this night, that illusion of peace was about to break. Inside one of those suburban homes lived Matthew Johnson, a 51-year-old veteran of the Utah National Guard. To his colleagues and friends, Matthew was steady, dependable, almost unshakable. He was a man whose life revolved around duty, structure, and service, someone who lived by a code of reliability. If Matthew said he would be somewhere, he would be there. If he promised something, he kept it. He was, in every sense, the kind of man you could count on. Beside him, in that same house, was his wife, Jennifer Gledhill, 42 years old. To neighbors, she was unremarkable, another suburban mother balancing family life and personal struggles. But beneath the surface, her world was unraveling. The marriage was fraying, torn apart by bitter arguments, financial pressure, and the discovery of an affair that would tilt the balance of trust beyond repair. From the outside, the Johnson home looked like every other house on the block, quiet, ordinary, unassuming. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations had turned sharp, silence had grown heavy, and the fragile thread holding the marriage together was snapping. As the night of September 20th unfolded, no one could have imagined how far it would go. Neighbors closed their blinds, unaware that inside the house just down the street, a chain of decisions was being set into motion, decisions that would erase a man, devastate a family, and lead to one of the most shocking criminal cases Utah had seen in years. In the hours after September 20th, 2024, life in Cottonwood Heights moved on as usual. Neighbors went about their routines, unaware that something irreversible had already happened just a few doors away. But for those closest to Matthew Johnson, alarm bells began ringing almost immediately. Matthew was not a man who simply disappeared. At 51 years old, he was a decorated member of the Utah National Guard, someone defined by discipline and duty. His life was built on reliability. He was the kind of man who always answered the phone, always kept his commitments, and never left anyone waiting. So when he failed to appear for work, his colleagues knew something was wrong. This wasn't neglect, it was something else, something darker. Calls to his phone went unanswered. Messages were never returned. His commanding officers grew uneasy, and soon friends and family began reaching out, searching for him. Each hour that passed without word from Matthew deepened the growing sense of dread. The first real clue appeared when his truck was located. Parked only a short distance from his home, the vehicle seemed ordinary at first glance, until investigators looked inside. His phone was there, switched off, silent. To those who knew him, that detail was impossible to ignore. Matthew Johnson didn't go anywhere without his phone. For him to leave it behind suggested only one thing: he hadn't left by choice. The discovery changed everything. What had begun as a missing person concern was now taking shape as a potential crime. A disciplined soldier had vanished into thin air, leaving behind his vehicle, his phone, his entire daily life. There were no signs of preparation, no clues that he had left voluntarily. Something had happened, and it had happened suddenly. Detectives began reconstructing his last known hours. Friends recalled no plans, no trips, no hints that he might be leaving. The timeline pointed directly back to the home he shared with his wife, Jennifer Gledhill. If answers existed, they would be found behind those walls. What investigators would soon uncover inside that house: faint bloodstains beneath the carpet, bleach marks on the wall, and a mattress curiously replaced, would confirm their worst fears. Matthew Johnson had not simply disappeared. His home, once a place of family life, was now the center of a chilling mystery. When investigators stepped inside the Johnson home, Nothing at first seemed out of place. The blinds were drawn, the furniture arranged as it always had been, and the air carried that familiar stillness of a suburban household. Yet for detectives trained to read the quiet language of crime scenes, the silence itself felt uneasy, as though the house was holding something back. The first thing they noticed was the bed. To a casual eye, it was ordinary, but investigators knew better. The mattress was brand new, delivered just days earlier. Relatives later confirmed that Jennifer had insisted on replacing the old one almost immediately after Matthew vanished. To detectives, this was more than suspicious. People don't replace mattresses overnight, not without a reason. They pulled back the sheets, examined the frame, and then lifted the carpet beneath. Underneath, invisible under normal light, were faint traces of blood. Forensic tools illuminated the stains, scattered in a pattern that told a silent story. Drops that fell where a head might rest. A spray near the wall, enough to suggest violence, not accident. Behind the headboard, on the wall itself, something else caught their attention: discoloration, uneven patches. When tested, the surface revealed the unmistakable presence of bleach. Someone had scrubbed there, hard, as if trying to erase a terrible secret. But bleach doesn't destroy everything. To the forensic eye, it only confirms that there was something worth hiding. Other details added to the unease. In the laundry, investigators noted the lingering smell of strong cleaning chemicals. On the bedroom floor, the carpet fibers appeared slightly worn, as though scrubbed repeatedly. Even the headboard itself bore subtle watermarks, reminders of a desperate attempt to wipe away what could not be undone. Detectives began piecing it together. Matthew Johnson, last seen at home on the night of September 20th, had likely met his end right there in that room. The evidence whispered of a violent act: blood, cleaning agents, replacement furniture. This was no disappearance, it was something far worse. And then there was Jennifer. When questioned, her demeanor struck investigators as strange. She was not frantic, not broken with worry over her missing husband. Instead, she was controlled, detached, her explanations rehearsed but shallow. She insisted she knew nothing. But her calmness, her lack of urgency, only deepened suspicion. Neighbors, too, had noticed unusual activity. A delivery truck had come not long after Matthew vanished, the new mattress arriving in suspiciously convenient timing. Some had seen Jennifer outside at odd hours, restless, moving quickly from the house to her vehicle. At the time, it had seemed trivial. In retrospect, it became another piece of the puzzle. The house was no longer just a residence. It had become a stage where something terrible had played out. Every detail, the stains beneath the carpet, the bleach on the wall, the mattress too new to be innocent, told investigators the same story. Matthew Johnson had not left his home alive, but suspicion was not enough. To prove murder without a body, detectives needed more. They needed testimony, a voice from outside the house that could reveal what Jennifer herself refused to say. And soon, that voice would arrive. A man who would step forward with a chilling story of confession. The investigation took a darker and more revealing turn when a man stepped forward, a figure who would later be identified in court documents only as the informant. He had known Jennifer Gledhill personally, and more than that, he had been involved with her in an affair that fractured the Johnson marriage. What he told detectives would shift the entire direction of the case. According to the informant, Jennifer had come to him in the days after Matthew's disappearance. She was anxious, unsettled, carrying a weight too heavy to hide. And then, in what he later described as a moment of chilling clarity, she confessed. Her words painted a horrifying picture. She told him she had waited until Matthew was asleep in their bed. Quietly, she reached for a 9mm pistol, his own firearm. Then, with a single shot, she ended his life. There was no struggle, no warning, just a sudden act of violence in the silence of the night. She described how she acted afterward, moving with a cold efficiency. She retrieved a rooftop storage container, the kind used for long road trips, and forced his body inside. Then, under cover of darkness, she carried the container out of the house, loaded it into her vehicle, and drove north into more secluded areas. There, she dug a shallow grave and buried her husband, leaving him hidden beneath the earth. When she returned home, she began the process of erasing the evidence. She stripped the bed, removed the old mattress, scrubbed the walls, doused the floor and furniture in bleach. She replaced what could be replaced and concealed what she could not. In her mind, it might have been enough to cover her tracks. But to investigators, it became a map of guilt. The informant didn't stop there. He provided investigators with proof, screenshots of messages, recordings of conversations, fragments of Jennifer's own words. In one of their late-night exchanges, she allegedly told him she would be going away for a long time. In another, she confessed that what she had done could never be undone. His account matched what police had already begun to suspect. The blood beneath the carpet, the chemical stains on the wall, the new mattress, the silence of Matthew's phone, all of it aligned with her chilling confession. Detectives now had not just forensic evidence, but a voice, someone claiming to have heard the truth directly from Jennifer herself. And though the body was still missing, her alleged words painted a picture far too vivid to ignore. But as critical as his testimony was, it also came with risk. In court, the defense would surely attack his credibility. Why had he come forward? Could his motives be trusted? Was he telling the truth or shaping a story for his own benefit? For prosecutors, however, the informant's testimony was gold, a narrative that filled the silence left behind by Matthew's disappearance. Together with the forensic trail, it created a case that pointed directly at Jennifer Gledhill. Still, one fact remained unshakable. Matthew Johnson's body had not been found, and until it was, the prosecution would need to build its case on shadows, stains, and a confession whispered to a lover. If the alleged confession to her lover had given investigators a story, the digital evidence gave them a map. In the modern age, phones do more than make calls. They record every step, every location, every silence. And Jennifer Gledhill's phone was no exception. Detectives began pulling records, analyzing GPS pings, data logs, and the electronic breadcrumbs she left behind. What they found matched the informant's account with disturbing precision. On the night of September 20th, Jennifer's phone was active in the Johnson home, just as expected. Then, during the critical window of time, when Matthew is believed to have been killed, her phone suddenly went dark. No calls, no texts, no signals. It was powered off, or deliberately disabled. Hours later, the phone came back online, but it didn't return in the same place. GPS data showed it moving north of the home, into areas far less populated, the kind of stretches of land where someone could disappear unnoticed. It wasn't just a single ping. The data revealed travel, stops, moments of idleness, before the phone finally returned to Cottonwood Heights. To investigators, it looked like the journey of someone transporting a body. The timing matched the informant's chilling testimony. The gunshot while Matthew slept, the rooftop container, the shallow grave. Even without a body, the digital trail spoke volumes. There were other details too. Activity logs revealed that Jennifer's device had been switched off more than once in those crucial hours, as though she understood that silence might help her escape attention. But technology is rarely so forgiving. The reactivations, the GPS routes, the gaps in data, they painted a timeline of movements that no innocent explanation could easily erase. Detectives compared these findings to Jennifer's own statements. The inconsistencies piled up. While she claimed ignorance of Matthew's whereabouts, her phone told a different story, one of travel, concealment, and return. This wasn't just suspicion, it was corroboration. Her lover's account of a confession now had the weight of digital evidence behind it. For prosecutors, it became a double-edged weapon, the human testimony of her words and the cold precision of technology mapping her actions. But the most haunting detail remained unsolved. The GPS data had shown travel into remote areas, but no exact burial site was ever confirmed. Detectives scoured stretches of land, searching for disturbed soil, scanning with cadaver dogs, hoping to locate Matthew Johnson's body. Again and again, they came back empty-handed. And so, even as the case grew stronger, it carried the silence of absence. No body, no grave, no final proof of where Matthew Johnson lay. Just digital shadows tracing the last journey he would ever take, carried by the woman now accused of ending his life. By October of 2024, the weight of the investigation came crashing down on Jennifer Gledhill. What began as a missing persons report had now transformed into one of the most complex criminal cases in Utah in years. Prosecutors filed their charges, and the list was long. A chilling catalogue of allegations that painted Jennifer not as a grieving wife, but as a calculating killer. The most serious was first-degree murder, the deliberate and intentional killing of Matthew Johnson. Prosecutors argued that she had planned her actions, carried them out with precision, and attempted to erase every trace. The charge carried the possibility of life behind bars. But the indictment didn't stop there. She faced multiple counts of obstruction of justice, each tied to the ways she allegedly tried to conceal the crime. Scrubbing the walls, bleaching the carpet, replacing the mattress, and attempting to dispose of incriminating items. Every act of cleaning, every hidden object, was now listed as evidence of deliberate cover-up. Another charge struck a haunting chord: abuse or desecration of a human body. Prosecutors claimed that by forcing Matthew's body into a rooftop container, transporting it, and burying it in a shallow grave, Jennifer had not only ended his life, but denied him dignity in death. There was also witness tampering, based on her alleged efforts to manipulate those around her, to silence, to persuade, or to steer their testimony away from the truth. This charge suggested a mind still working after the crime, not in panic but in calculation. Finally, in a surprising discovery, investigators found controlled substances in her vehicle, hallucinogenic mushrooms, packaged in a way that suggested not casual use but intent to distribute. This added yet another layer to the case, a portrait of a woman entangled in secrets far beyond the walls of her home. When she appeared in court, Jennifer stood before the judge calm, but the seriousness of her situation was undeniable. Bail was denied. She would remain behind bars as prosecutors prepared for what promised to be a long and highly publicized trial. Her parents, too, faced charges of obstruction, their role in the alleged cover-up pulling them into the legal storm. What once had been a private family tragedy was now an unfolding courtroom drama with an entire household under scrutiny. Yet for all the charges, for all the evidence, the prosecution faced a challenge that loomed large over everything. There was still no body. Without Matthew Johnson's remains, their case relied on circumstantial evidence, forensic traces, and the testimony of an informant whose credibility the defense would certainly attack. The question was no longer just whether Jennifer Gledhill had killed her husband. It was whether prosecutors could convince a jury beyond reasonable doubt, without the most vital piece of evidence of all. For prosecutors, the evidence against Jennifer Gledhill was strong. The blood beneath the carpet, the bleach on the wall, the replaced mattress, the chilling testimony of the informant, and the digital trail that mapped her movements in the dead of night. But despite this mountain of circumstantial proof, the case carried one devastating weakness. There was no body. Without Matthew Johnson's remains, there was no autopsy, no official cause of death, no bullet to match conclusively to a weapon. What investigators had were stains, fragments, and silence, pieces of a puzzle without its center. And in a courtroom, that silence can be powerful. The defense would seize on it immediately. They could argue that without a body, there was no way to prove Matthew was truly dead. Perhaps he had left voluntarily. Perhaps the story was not as clear as prosecutors claimed. They could point to the informant's testimony and call it unreliable, born out of jealousy, self-interest, or manipulation. They could demand proof that prosecutors could not deliver: a grave, a body, the physical certainty of murder. Even the digital evidence, compelling as it was, could be reframed. The GPS trail could be dismissed as coincidence. The phone being switched off could be explained as a simple choice. Without a body, every piece of evidence was vulnerable to reinterpretation. And yet, for the family of Matthew Johnson, the absence was far more painful than strategic. His parents, siblings, and friends were left without the possibility of closure. There was no funeral, no final goodbye, no grave to visit. They lived with the unrelenting torment of not knowing where he was, even as prosecutors argued that they knew what had happened to him. For Jennifer's children, the silence was even more brutal. They had lost their father to violence and their mother to an arrest, all while living under the weight of unanswered questions. In the eyes of the law, the missing body became both the greatest obstacle and the most haunting symbol of the case. It was the void at the center of the story, a man erased, a life extinguished, but no remains to confirm it. The trial, set for December 2025, would hinge on whether the jury could accept a murder without a corpse. Could they believe the stains on the carpet, the confession to a lover, and the phone's silent trail were enough to convict? Or would the absence of Matthew Johnson's body cast just enough doubt to let Jennifer Gledhill slip through the cracks of justice? While prosecutors built their case and the defense prepared its counterattack, beyond the walls of the courthouse, the true devastation of this story was unfolding. For Matthew Johnson's family, the disappearance was more than a legal battle. It was an unending nightmare. Every day without answers was a day without closure, a day marked by the hollow ache of absence. They had no grave to visit, no final moment to hold on to, no chance to say goodbye. His parents, siblings, and friends lived with the relentless uncertainty of where he was, forced to imagine again and again the fate he had suffered. Matthew had been more than a soldier. He was a father, a son, a man whose life was anchored in discipline and service. Those who knew him remembered his steadiness, his reliability, his quiet but unshakable presence. For them, his disappearance wasn't just shocking, it was unthinkable. For Jennifer's children, the tragedy was doubled. They had lost their father to violence and their mother to accusation. The house that once held both parents now echoed with silence, replaced by whispers of scandal, courtrooms, and headlines. They were caught between grief and shame, forced to live with the unbearable weight of being the children of both the victim and the accused. The community of Cottonwood Heights, too, felt the ripple. Neighbors who once saw Jennifer as another suburban mother now spoke in hushed tones about bleach, mattresses, and murder. The neighborhood, once a picture of peace, had become the backdrop for suspicion and betrayal. Even within Jennifer's own family, fractures appeared. Her parents, charged with obstruction, faced the possibility of prison themselves. What had once been bonds of loyalty now looked like complicity. The Gledhill name, tied forever to Matthew's absence, carried with it the stain of secrecy and silence. And through it all, the unanswered question lingered. Where was Matthew Johnson? Without his body, there could be no closure, only pain stretched into endless days and nights. His family prayed for justice, but more than anything, they prayed for him to be found, to bring him home, to lay him to rest, to end the limbo that consumed their lives. The human cost of the crime was incalculable. Behind every piece of evidence, behind every legal argument, were people left shattered, a man erased, children scarred, families torn apart. And as the trial drew closer, the courtroom would decide Jennifer Gledhill's fate. But for those who loved Matthew, no verdict could ever bring him back. As the months passed, the case of Jennifer Gledhill moved slowly but relentlessly toward the courtroom. Prosecutors gathered every fragment they could: the stains beneath the carpet, the bleach on the walls, the testimony of the informant, the GPS trail, and the suspicious behavior of Jennifer's parents. Their task was daunting: to prove murder without a body. But they were determined to lay before the jury a story so compelling, so complete, that doubt would not survive. The defense, meanwhile, prepared its counterattack. They would highlight the absence of Matthew Johnson's body, hammering again and again at the silence it left behind. They would question the credibility of the informant, suggesting motives of jealousy, manipulation, or lies. They would remind the jury that stains can be explained, that digital data can be misinterpreted, that coincidences can be mistaken for guilt. In December of 2025, the trial is set to begin. The courtroom will become the stage where two narratives collide, one of calculated murder and concealment, the other of doubt and uncertainty. For Matthew's family, it will be the moment they have waited for, not because it will ease their pain, but because it may finally deliver justice for the son, the brother, the father they lost. For Jennifer's children, it will be a reckoning they never asked for, a trial that may condemn their mother even as they mourn their father. And for the community of Cottonwood Heights, it will mark the culmination of a story that shattered the quiet illusion of suburban safety. What really happened in that house on September 20th, 2024, may never be fully known. The absence of Matthew Johnson's body leaves a void that no verdict can fill. But the trial will attempt to answer the question that has haunted everyone since that night: was Jennifer Gledhill truly the architect of her husband's disappearance and death, or will the shadow of doubt leave the case unresolved? As the jury listens, as evidence is laid out piece by piece, the world will watch. And when the verdict finally comes, it will not only decide Jennifer Gledhill's fate, it will close one chapter of a story written in blood, silence, and betrayal, even as another chapter of grief continues for those left behind.